Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of answering your wine questions. I got so many questions last time, I actually split this video into 2. So go back to last week's video if you want to see that. And this week, we're gonna do another batch of questions that came from our Vino VIP members. But without further ado, let's dive back into the questions. Scott asks, what are the do's and don'ts for decanting wine? Is it purely the age or the taste? I'm glad you asked. I have a whole video about it. I'll put the link right here. But essentially, most wines will benefit from decanting. There's very few that'll be harmed by decanting. Really, really old wines, you might not want to decant because they're fragile. Anything other than that will benefit. Young wines benefit because they benefit from air exposure, especially young red wines, because they're tannic and it helps to basically, what you're doing is essentially the process of evolving in the bottle. You're doing that in the decanter. Instead of that slow oxygenation in the bottle, you're kind of like trying to speed it up by decanting it. Now you're not gonna get the same effect, but it's what you're doing. You're softening the tannins. You're helping it also open up and become more open and offering, because wines, when they're closed in the bottle, sometimes they're not as expressive as they will be after some exposure to oxygen. And so any wine will benefit, even white wines, especially specific white wines like Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, Riesling, but most white wines will also benefit. So most wines benefit from the opening up of the wine. And then specifically, if you have an older wine, you're gonna have sediment in the bottom of the bottle and you need to get the sediment out. And so what you do is you pour into the decanter, but you stop before the sediment goes in so that you don't consume it. And so that's the reason you do old wines. But I would say if you have a nice bottle, don't be afraid to decant, and watch that video. I go into details all about it. All right, Joe asks, just heard we have the fewest number of people drinking wine since 1996. Do you believe that, and why? I don't know. I mean, listen, I hear this first off. I mean, I believe it because everybody's screaming it. Wine people in particular, people in the industry are really worried. They're all hurting. They're all selling less wine than they used to. So the question is why? Now, I can only speak to America, but I think what happened is you saw wine and wine tastings start to become very expensive, number one. If you go up to a tasting in Northern California right now, it's $40 a person, $50 a person. Like, that's not if you're just getting into wine and then you think that that's what wine is, like, that's a bad impression that I have to spend $100 per tasting for me and my wife or girlfriend or whatever it might be to go up and have a good time. So that's a little crazy, number one. I think the price in general of everything has been going up, and you can get a glass of beer or a cocktail for less money than a glass of wine. Like, if you go on a wine list here in America, bottles start hopefully at $40 to $45 in a major city. Now you might find cheaper wines, but those are like at places that don't really do wine, right? They have some wines on the list, but they're really a bar. But a place that does wine and has decent wine lists, bottles start at $45, $50, and I see lists that start at $60. And so that's not accessible when you go to, say, compared to a Europe or a South America, and there's lots of great bottles in the 20 to 30 range on the menu, not like for retail, at a restaurant. And so if they don't find a way to get prices under control and stop it basically comes down to our 3-tier system and the taxes that we throw on it. It makes it really inaccessible. And then cocktail, and also we've never had more options for good beverages. Cocktail scene is amazing right now. Craft beer scene is amazing right now. And so there's a lot of options, and that's the other thing. And then hopefully we can fix the last problem, which I think people just don't understand it and don't understand why it's so amazing, but that's hopefully that the show can help do. So those are I don't know, I'm just pontificating. I don't really have exact answers, but those are my thoughts. All right, Amber asks, what advice would you give to somebody who aspires to make a YouTube channel and a content creator? What's step number 1? And how do you narrow down content ideas and pick just one subject? Yeah, that's a great question. The number one question, I talk a lot about entrepreneurship on some of the podcasts I do, so keep an eye out for those. I always post them on social, but I'm big on not looking up for 5 years. Just, if you're gonna start a project, don't judge its success or failure until you really commit for 5 years or more And because you're gonna learn so much. You're gonna learn how to post, you're gonna learn who you are, you're gonna learn who your audience is, what's resonating. I have so many stories I can go into, but they would take too long. But essentially, you're gonna need to pivot, you're gonna need to commit, and don't worry about figuring out how you're gonna make money and growing your audience super rapidly in the first couple of years, because it's just not gonna happen. It's gonna take time and effort. So commit, and then how do you narrow down your ideas or pick just one subject? It's gotta be something you're passionate about, obviously. And I don't think you even have to narrow it down to one subject. I just think you need to learn what your audience resonates with. And so once you see that videos are picking up because your audience found a content and a style of you presenting that they like, or a topic that they like, double down on what's good. And you'll only figure that out by producing a lot of content. Okay, Will and Delisa Rice ask, while your content is different from other YouTube wine guys, have you considered doing collaborations with someone like Andre Mack or Konstantin Baum? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'd love to get him on the show. I would love Konstantin to come on a German episode, for instance. Andre, I don't know how we'll collab. I eventually would love to do a long form video podcast in like a restaurant setting, and I could interview, I have lots of people I want to talk to, but in general, yeah, I really would like to talk to him. Like I said, Konstantin I've been in touch with, he's a friend. Andre, I don't know, but I'm sure we know some of the same people, but there's a whole laundry list of people who I'd love to talk to. So that will, I think, happen one day. As we grow, I have more resources, because right now the show keeps me fully committed, but hopefully we can maybe do this type of content in the future. William Barnwell asks, you've said in other interviews that you edited your early videos. What path did you take to develop your filmmaking and editing skills? Great question. This kind of goes back to the entrepreneurship thing I talked about earlier, because when I came into this industry, I knew how to talk about wine. I had the education and I worked in restaurants. I didn't know anything about film or content creation, and I had to learn that. And honestly, so much of it was trial and error. Like I said, 5 years, don't even look up. But also, I mean, Google's amazing. I realized that the editing was so much of a film budget, and I also learned it was so much of the product. And so I just went online. I took an online course and I learned more and more, and I did lots of Googling and YouTubing. I mean, the amazing thing about living in 2024 is the wealth of knowledge that's available on the internet. You just have to know how to sift through it and look and watch a lot of it. And so overall, that path of necessity, whereas like, I can't make this if I can't edit myself because I don't have the money to hire an editor, that path of necessity drove me to help learn how to do it. And so I'm big on that. And don't be afraid to take on a new challenge, because you can learn more than you think. Okay, John Powers asks, we belong to a number of vineyard wine clubs and get shipments of wine a couple times a year. Most are red. These are generally new releases from vintages that are 2 to 3 years old. Do you have an opinion on drinking them now or holding them for a few years? And I'm gonna combine this with another question, which is Mike. Mike asked, how do we determine which wines are good for aging? Because you're essentially asking the same question. In a red wine, we need acid and tannin, and maybe sugar if you have a sweet wine like a port, but most wines that won't qualify. So you need acid and you need tannin, because those things act as preservatives for the wine. And so high acid wines and high tannin wines, the acidity and the tannin fade with time. So if you start at a medium or low level of acidity, you have less time before that wine is flabby, right? But if you start a really high level, think Barolo. Barolo is this super screaming acid, super high tannin wine. You have plenty of time before those things fade where the wine isn't good anymore. And in the meantime, as it's aging and those things are helping preserve the wine, the acidity and the tannin, the wine will develop into flavors. Basically, I have a segment on aging, but it will develop from primary flavors to tertiary flavors, more earthy flavors. The fruit starts to fade. You go from, fresh roses to dried potpourri roses. You go from fresh lemon to candied lemon, things like that. So basically, you want to look at the acid and tannin levels. They have to be really high. Usually, wineries, their top cuvées, so their most expensive cuvées, are the ones that are with the best grapes, the most concentrated grapes, and the ones that are meant to age. So their entry-level wines, I'd say pop whenever you want. Their more expensive wines, the ones that they, maybe make less bottlings of, the single vineyards, those are usually the ones that are meant to age. Kathy asks, Why does a winemaker choose to use either a French or American barrel? So most places in the world, by the way, use French barrels. There's only 2 places in the world that really, at a big scale, use American oak, besides bourbon, funny enough. But it's Australia and it's Rioja, Spain. And the flavor that American oak gives is really, really distinct. It gives coconut, dill, like fresh dill, and sour cherry, those notes. And it also, you can feel the oak presence more in American oak. It's just, I think the grain is different. And so if you like those flavors as a winemaker, you use those. And if you don't, you don't. But it's gonna affect the wine a lot. So I think most winemakers prefer French oak because it's a little softer on the wine, and you spend all this time growing the grapes, and you don't want the wine to taste like wood, you want it to taste like fruit. But they've just traditionally, in Rioja, done it for a long time. That's like their style, and so you really taste that oak, but that's okay because it's kind of what you want to taste in Rioja. And in Australia, those wines are so big and so rich that they can kind of stand up to the heavier presence of American oak. Dennis asks, throwback episode, who are all the people in the Judgement of Paris scene? Yeah, that's funny. I love that scene. That is actually my wife's improv team. And you can see they kind of ham it up. I have some outtakes from that episode, I think, but essentially they had a great time, you know, making that segment fun and funny, and it came off exactly how I wanted it to come off. But yeah, it's my improv comedy team, so pretty fun little tidbit there. Okay, Mike asks, is humidity control critical for storing wines? Yes, if it's super long term. A couple years, I'm not so worried. Even that, I might be a little worried. But long term, the longer you go, the more important it is, essentially. Because the worry, and the same reason we lay wines on their side when we store them, is that the cork's gonna dry out. If the cork dries out, then it's going to allow oxygen in at too quickly a rate, and it's gonna ruin the wine. And so if you're gonna store wine for many, many years, you wanna make sure the humidity, either in your house or in the cellar that you're keeping it in, is the right humidity. Win and Rosie ask, what is your most favorite wine and food pairing? I would say there's a lot of great ones. Thai and Riesling is a great one for me, but I'm gonna go with grilled pork chops and California Pinot Noir. So as you do a grilled pork chop with like some sort of like cherry reduction sauce on top, and you do that with a California Pinot, like that is so good. It's such a great summer meal too, you know. It's different than steak, which I like, but it's heavier than like a fish. It's just, pork is underrated. I love a good thick cut pork chop, so that's my pairing I'm gonna go with today. Linda asks, do you refrigerate red wine after it's open? And if so, does that buy you more time before you need to drink it? Yeah, it does. Refrigeration slows down the oxygenation process. Going back to oxygen, it's kind of the enemy once you have an open wine. So yes, you can just put it in the fridge when you're done and then let it sit and get to room temperature or close to room temperature before you drink it again. But I would say either way with red wine, you only got a couple days. It really depends on how full the bottle is, which is, everybody asks, how long can you drink a wine after it's open? And the real answer is it depends how much oxygen is in the bottle. If it's only a quarter of a bottle, like it's gonna go really quick. If you only took one glass out of the bottle, well, you've got less oxygen per wine ratio, and so it'll last a bit longer. But I try to drink red wines within 2-3 days, no matter what. Okay, Rick and Ann asks, do you have any plans to revisit West Coast wine regions? Earlier, I think I had mentioned that I don't really have many plans to revisit any wine regions I've been to, but I will say some of the early episodes, I'm thinking season 1, Paso, Santa Barbara, and Napa, I might consider going back there only because those episodes were like quick. They were a half hour, they were when we first starting, and I would like to do those again, knowing the knowledge I know now and the expertise with the camera crew and all that we have now. So maybe, but there's also some California regions I haven't been to. Like I haven't been to Sierra Nevada foothills, for instance, Temecula. So I could maybe do that too. I'm also just having a lot of fun though, going international. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of like the travel. Okay, last question. It's a good one to end on. Daniel asks, what are your next destinations for episodes? Is Bourgogne or another Spain DOC in your plans? So glad you asked. We are filming in both Bourgogne, which you might know as Burgundy, France, and Loire Valley, France in June and July this year. So just coming up, those episodes are going to be out before the end of the year. They're going to be amazing because both very iconic, amazing regions. Obviously the reputation of Bourgogne, but then Loire Valley has some of my most favorite exciting wines. I mentioned the Chenin Blanc earlier. So very exciting. And then in the future, next year, one of the ones that I think will happen, I hope, is Rioja, which again, another favorite wine region of mine, and we haven't been there. I really, and I say really, I want to get to Jerez and do a sherry episode, but I don't have any immediate plans for it. I just want to do it because I love sherry. And yeah, there's a lot of other places that I'm talking with right now. Nothing I can get into in depth, but I can tell you it's going to be a fun couple years for sure. And there it is, all the questions I got from our Vino VIP members. If you want to ask questions the next time we do one of these, you have to join Vino VIP. I'll put the link in the description. It starts only $5 a month. It's a great community. You get access to our members only Facebook page, exclusive content, early access to our videos. And it's just a really good way to help support us too, because it's one of the ways we're able to keep producing content. So please consider joining if you haven't. To our Vino VIPs, thank you for watching and thank you for being VIPs. And we will see you next time for more wine questions. I'll see you soon.